Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Guernsey, Director of the Teaching, Learning, and Tech program at New America. And for those of you who were with us yesterday, a big welcome back to everybody. It's great to be getting into day two of this Media Mentorship Forum and Workshop. The workshop part is tomorrow, so definitely make sure you've signed up for that, because we'll be able to really get some good workshopping, some ideas kind of down on paper or on Google Doc as it is these days tomorrow. So I'm really thrilled to welcome you all here today. Yesterday helped us to see some of the really big themes that we're facing every day in our work, whether it's as librarians. I know there's just many of you who are in the library space who have joined us. We have many educators as well from schools around the country, as well as those who work in education associations and in different organizations, advocacy and leadership organizations, as well as professional learning, public media. We've got so many, just a fantastic ton of diversity of participants with us today. So I'm thrilled for that. And for those of you who were with us yesterday, we talked about centering equity. That, of course, has many dimensions and ways of being defined. In our context, we really are thinking about those students and families who are often the most underserved and do not have resources at their disposal for a whole host of reasons, of course, many of them having to do with marginalization, historical and structural racism, and existing conditions. But we also are talking about digital inequity and the intersection points. And we're going to continue with some of those themes today. We're also going to be diving much more deeply into what and where the connections are between mentoring on these issues of media and the media literacy skills that we know are so important and coming up looming quite large in so much of the public discourse today. So I'm going to do just a couple of quick introductory notes for you, and then I'll be turning it over to an amazing panel for a deeper discussion on these media literacy issues. I do want to first say thanks again to our funder for this forum and for our larger project across 3 library systems in Illinois, the McCormick Foundation. So we're very grateful for their support. And I want to thank our library partners who have been with us throughout this project. Yesterday, you heard from Mary Ellen Messner, the acting commissioner for Chicago Public Library. Caroline Roerin of Chicago Public Library has been one of our key partner for Chicago Public Library. Shelley Sutherland of Skokie Public Library, and you'll also hear today from Amy Kuster of Skokie Public Library, have been great partners with us, and Amber Krieger of Schaumburg Township Public Library, and you'll hear Amber tomorrow, and I think she's also with us here today. So a big thanks to all of you. It's been really a lot of fun to be doing this project together. So a couple of notes. Yesterday we released the guide, or a guide, calling it a guide to media mentorship. And I hope you'll take a look at that guide. We provide in that a working definition of media mentorship as we're thinking about it at New America, which dovetails, I think, nicely with the way it's been defined in other contexts as well. We're thinking of it in a fairly broad way so that it's not just librarians who are seeing themselves as mentors, but librarians absolutely have are very well poised to be taking on this role. And I'll just quickly say that the definition again. It is the act of providing tailored guidance and modeling what it looks like to select, analyze, and use media in ways that lead to learning, literacy, and engagement. So we'll be talking about that in much more depth very soon. I do want to note, as we did yesterday, that media doesn't have to mean digital media. It really does encompass all forms of media. And parents, teachers, and students do need, of course, access to print and digital materials and all sorts of like analog and digital hybrids as well. But in today's context, and certainly right now with COVID-19 and causing so many of us to have to work from home and work through screens like this, the digital deluge is very real for so many of our families and our students and our teachers. And it's becoming more important than ever to learn how to be selective and discerning in finding media materials that are digital. as well as just in finding materials that are best for children and students and helping them to learn and feel engaged with their world, but also to search for and sort through different streams of information and know how to do that sorting and analyzing. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in this upcoming panel. So we are going to be, again, it's going to be fast paced like it was yesterday. We've got these in like 15-minute chunks, and we're kind of putting people together in conversation with each other to get things started. But I do encourage you to use the chat function or the Q&A function to put some questions in for us. I'll be looking at that, and our communication staff will as well, so that we can bring those questions back to the panelists. And follow along with the agenda online if you can. I think we can put that agenda in the chat for you in a moment here if it's not there already. Okay, so let me introduce our amazing panelists to get us going today. This is for the session that's titled Helping People Develop Media Literacy, and everything that's entailed in that. We have with us Danelle Probst, who's Associate Director of the National Association for Media Literacy Education, and Jamika Anderson, who's a consultant for namely the National Association for Media Literacy Education, and also the founder of a project she may be able to describe for us a bit more, an initiative and organization called I Am Not the Media. And we also have Amy Kuster, who's the Learning Experiences Manager at Skokie Public Library, and who will be kind of both moderator, questioner, and also someone who, as someone working in a library, really understands these issues as well and will be able to provide her commentary. And I just want to note too that Amy is the editor of a digital of an ebook that's been incredibly useful to me and to others who are looking at this concept of media mentorship. It's called Young Children, New Media and Libraries. And there's a link to that in the agenda. So I am now going to turn it over to the three of you to get us started, and just want to say a big thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's really a pleasure to be here to continue the conversation for this day 2. Since we do have a quick schedule and lots to talk about, I want to jump right in. So we talked a lot yesterday. Many of our speakers touched on media mentorship, which Lisa redefined for us today. And that connects to the concepts and support for media literacy. So Danelle, from your work with NAMELY, the National Association for Media Literacy Education, can you talk about how that group defines media literacy and what are the core components?
Yeah, so we, for anybody who's not familiar with NAMELY, we are a national nonprofit organization. We have about 5,500 individual members and 70 plus organizational partners, and our individual membership is totally free. So if you haven't signed up, please do so. And so we really look at media literacy as the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using all forms of media. So it really delves into all the different components that go into being an active media participant. So whether you're creating media, whether you're learning how to access it and evaluating content and really digging into the messages and the meanings of that content, it's really a big picture. It's not just one component, but it's the ability to do all of those things. And like Lisa mentioned earlier, it's using all kinds of media. So whether that's digital media, print media, advertising, entertainment, all of it. It encompasses everything.
Yeah, all right. And NAMELY is definitely one of the lead organizations in this area with so many great resources. And there's been a lot more overlap in the past couple of years with NAMELY and the American Library Association. Now, Jamika, one of the many projects that you do excellent work on, you're an advisor on ALA's Media Literacy Education in Libraries for Adult Audiences project. And so, that's focusing on media literacy with adults. We're talking a lot about students and families here. Where do you feel like there's overlap in what we've determined for adults and how we support kids and families?
I think definitely there's overlap with understanding the core concepts of media literacy, understanding that the needs that impact across the board among all populations, adults, children, and specifically, and I would be remiss if I didn't say I work in the libraries library for 10 years. So in teen services, so teens as well, although these populations, we kind of look at serving them differently based off of their developmental stages and their needs. When we look at their backgrounds and the challenges that they may have with accessibility and where they fall on the scope of media literacy skills, that approach is one and the same with how we are to serve those populations. So one of the things that I really do love about this project that ALA has implemented, I'm not sure if you all know about the website, but the website is available, Media Literacy Education in Libraries for Adult Audiences, but the resources that are available that this advisory committee has created are foundational skills and understanding of how to serve patrons, and they're applicable to all audiences. So understanding how to meet them when they come to the desk, what type of conversations to engage with to help people understand what media literacy is. And those are tools and resources that I think all of the librarians can benefit from accessing. And that guide is now available. It just launched last week. I found out and they were like, please share, let everyone know. But there is a facilitator practitioner guide for doing media literacy in libraries.
Yeah, that's so excellent. And I dropped the link in the chat, some really fabulous resources to go hand in hand with resources we can get from Namely too. And Jamaica, I think you raised a really great point that for librarians, library practitioners to have these tools, it's so important because this doesn't tend to be a topic that has historically been covered very well in library school or library instruction. So I'm curious, Jamaica, with your library background, and also Danelle from your background supporting all media educators, what are some areas that you feel like librarianship can really strengthen or further develop so that we can do a better job of more consistently promoting media literacy for our patrons, especially our young patrons?
I think, well, for me, and we had this conversation when we did our convening with media experts and librarians across the nation that came together in this convening to talk about media literacy in libraries with ALA. And one of the things that came out that was consistent is that librarians are implementing media literacy without even knowing that they're doing it. And as opposed to approaching it as a foreign concept or a new concept, it's very key for librarians to really look at some of the programming that they're already implementing and looking at how that incorporates those skills of media literacy and how they can enhance it. And so a lot of librarians, what we do, we're really exposing our patrons on a daily basis to media, books, film, audio, but how can we incorporate media in our programs and teach some of those foundational skills? And so in that guide, once again, from that conversation is a list of like basic programs that we do that you will find at any library and how they incorporate media literacy in it. So you can understand as a librarian, these are the skills that this program is already providing when I do book talks, when I do film discussions, and then helping them understand these are the skills that your patrons are acquiring and how you can enhance the conversation or enhance the dialogue and really center media literacy in the program. So that's one of the things I would say is making those connections that already exist.
Yeah, and I think for me as well, so I actually, when I went back to school for my master's for library science, I had already gone through media studies undergraduate and had been working with Namely, and I kept incorporating media literacy into all of my coursework, and all of my professors were like, what is this? Like, we have never heard of this before. What is this that you're doing? And it, and it was really interesting because I would say it's so, they're like, cousins, they're so close. Media literacy is a form of literacy. And, as a librarian, we all work, in the more traditional literacies, but the thing I love about media literacy is that, like traditional literacies, it spans all of the ages. So whether you're working with, early childhood ages and you're talking about the meanings of images and learning how to deconstruct, more than just the words on the page, and you're talking about, things in the, kind of the evolution of literacy through a lifetime, media literacy is done the same way, where some people are at the very beginning of learning, the really kind of basics of media literacy, while other people have really evolved and they're kind of in the law school level media literacy with, critical media literacy and some really complex topics around representation and other things that are higher level concepts. So I think understanding, that they're so closely related, and every time I try to bring more librarians into, try to bring them into the tribe, and I say, look, this is amazing. And I always say that once people realize what it is, they absolutely love it. And so then they kind of latch onto it and say, this is so familiar. I'm already doing this. And so I can really continue to enhance what I'm doing by understanding kind of the nuance of media literacy and how it incorporates into the things that I'm already doing.
Yeah, that's so important. And I'm so glad that both of you brought that up, that like a perfect on-ramp for libraries is looking what our existing practices and ways of doing things are. It makes me think, since we have a lot of youth-focused library folks in attendance, back when the Every Child Ready to Read research came out, and it was like, all right, here's what you're already doing in story time, and here's the specific skill it develops. And there's power in being able to like focus in on developing that skill. And so that's the same sort of process we're looking at with these resources. What are we already doing, and how do we amplify the impact of that? So that's so great. So I'm thinking too about what you've both shared about how this spans the age ranges. And I know that's something that we're seeing in a lot of households now with our context with the pandemic, e-learning, multiple generations at home together a lot of the time. And so I'm wondering in your work, how you're seeing that having impacted like the day-to-day lives, like the media use, media needs of families. And where are you really seeing maybe that you weren't previously, like there are some big places that we can focus, or there's attention now that there wasn't before?
So I think it's really interesting because, we always say that we get a lot of requests from parents, because when they understand that there's kind of this gap in the learning and that it isn't necessarily something that's embedded in education, it's not something that's in compulsory education, it's, rarely in, kind of this, community ed space, although it's really growing and has been growing the last, 10 plus 20 years. I think parents recognize that there is a definite need for it in the home. And so we're starting to see more and more resources that are developed that are geared towards parents and having those conversations with kids. And, I think there's also a space in that, that library space with community ed, in that, you have, depending on what kind of library you work in, you have the opportunity to work with so many different ages. And so we see a lot of requests for parents. We also see a lot of requests for that 55 plus crowd as well. We have a lot of people saying, hey, my mom or my dad is, really sucked into this news source. And like, how do I talk to them about X, Y, and Z? And so we're starting to see more classes and more community efforts around older populations as well. It's not so much geared towards kids, teens, and we're seeing a lot of involvement in kind of that college age where they're really starting to kind of take this on as their cause and say, like, we recognize there's an issue here and that we need to have better media literacy skills. So I think it's really overwhelming to say the least. There's a lot of demand, and I think there's so much opportunity, which is why I think it's just such an exciting field to be in right now.
Oh, Janika, you're muted.
I hate when that happens. So I would say with the work that I do, and I know Lisa shared earlier that I have a nonprofit organization called I Am Not the Media, and I've built a lot of community partnerships that centers on providing programming to youth. And since COVID-19 happened, a lot of our programming has went digital. And so really having that hands-on experience as a practitioner in the field with engaging with youth with media literacy in a digital remote platform take that, and then on top of that, simultaneously at the same time, I'm working on a PhD and doing research on technology and accessibility. And so what I would say over this past year, one of the main things that has come to be as the main focus right now with serving parents and youth is the issue with accessibility. And what I found out, and also have worked with some of my colleagues in my PhD program and with doing programming, is that what we kind of looked at with accessibility with children before, when it comes to digital media, is this idea that, hey, these are digital natives, they're engaging with media on their cellular phone devices, and so they should be somewhat digitally competent, right? But what we're noticing is that that's not the case. And we actually identified this group called digitally foreign learners. And we just written an article about this with the Middle School Association, and looking at how these students, although they might be engaging with social media, they still are lacking the understanding of how to access certain digital tools in an academic type of way. So how to utilize digital media in an educational, informative way. They may be engaging with media in an entertainment aspect, but when it comes to utilizing media in a sophisticated academic type of way, they're digitally foreign to that concept. And so we're seeing that's definitely taking place with students from historically marginalized communities and rural communities. And so with understanding that, one of the main focuses that we've even written in our practitioner pieces for publications is libraries are one of the huge resources to kind of help with this issue, understanding these needs, because a lot of those children that come from those backgrounds, their parents don't have that knowledge to actually help them or have the ability to help them learn how to navigate online in academic ways, digital media and technology. So that's one of the main things that we started to notice over the last year with transitioning to creating media in a learning aspect with youth. And so add that challenge on there, of course, and then put on the challenge with information resources and helping them understand credible resources. I think that has been the center of the main issues with media literacy that we've been tackling.
Yeah, that's so important to point out. And I love that you specifically debunked that digital native means you know how to use it in all of the ways myth, because just because you have the tool in your pocket in the form of a smartphone doesn't mean you know all the ways to use it. And that's one of the things that I really love, with the definition of media literacy, really actively including, not only accessing and using it, but analyzing it, creating with it. That's a big piece. It's not just something that you're receiving, it's that you're really working with. So I'm wondering, for the last couple of minutes we've got left, and you're talking about this a little bit, but what are some of the new media developments that you're seeing within this landscape? Librarians, we like to try and stay on top of what are the trends, the emerging technologies. And I know I was talking with a couple of colleagues last week that podcasting for kids in particular has really grown this year. Now 1 in 4 kids regularly listens to podcasts, which is a pretty big thing. And so if we're looking at what the media landscape is like, what are the places that you feel like we can be putting our attention?
I didn't know Donnell wanted to take that on. I was, as you were speaking, Amy, I'm podcasting has went through the roof, right? I honestly, okay, so even with me, I'm doing a lot of programming with libraries right now. And I think the challenge that I'm seeing, even with the libraries, specifically here in Charlotte, North Carolina, is the challenge with programming right now, because they can't get people into the libraries right now. Well, I know in Charlotte, it's still, kind of testing the waters online. I think I've seen a lot of leverage with utilizing technology apps more to incorporate in remote programming. So Facebook Lives and Marco Polos and WhatsApps, and creating programming that's centered around utilizing digital media technology to engage and educate at the same time. So those are some of the trends that I'm seeing right now with libraries, kind of being adaptable to what has taken place, and figuring out ways to creatively engage people more remotely. And so meeting also teams where they're at with social media apps as well.
Yeah, I definitely think the creation piece is probably the biggest place that libraries are playing a role. And I think in general, youth, it's most engaging, obviously, for young people to be able to create. I think, it's really, we're finding interesting ways that young people are engaging with activism and really trying to find their voice and finding voices, in the crowd that maybe haven't been represented in the past. And so that's been a really powerful tool for youth that I think a lot of youth have latched onto. And we're seeing programming that's coming out, where there's community programmings that are combining with libraries and really trying to get to youth that wouldn't maybe otherwise have that opportunity through their school. Or trying to provide the type of technology that's needed that they might not have access to, depending on where their homeschool is or even their libraries. So there's a lot of challenges, and it's definitely not an equal playing field, as Jamaica was talking about. So I think it's exciting at the same time, but there's still a lot of obstacles that we need to overcome in order to make all of those exciting opportunities accessible to everybody.
Yeah, definitely. And Lisa's going to come back in now because we got a question submitted by one of our attendees today, and that'll let us kind of wrap up this excellent panel.
Yes, thanks guys so much. A question came in from, oh my gosh, Mega, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but it's a really good question. I want to say it from Mega Subramaniam. And I'll read it out and then just would be really interested in your reflections. How do we inform and educate the public that libraries are not only providing access to media, but that we also integrate media literacy development into the programs we offer? I feel like there are some traditional public perceptions of what libraries do, and libraries are often viewed only as providing physical access, but not as providing the intellectual access to media literacy development. What are your take on that?
I think that's a common challenge with media literacy in general, not just media literacy in libraries, is, there's a real kind of public perception issue that we have, that it's, number one, it's a very academic sounding term. So, saying to people, hey, it's like, instead of calling it library, saying, I'm going to go get my information literacy today, like, it's, library is a friendly term for, what libraries do. And media literacy doesn't really have that, and so I think that's one of the things Namely's been working through, is we just launched a big PSA campaign called Media Monsters, to really try to make it more accessible. We're, aiming for, audiences that maybe have never heard of this. And really it's about trying to get a public push for the need for media literacy, will then make it easier for libraries and other institutions to implement the programming, to find funding for the programming, for people to start realizing there's a need for more tools, for more organization of all those tools. I think there's a lot of obstacles, but we've made so much progress that I think we'll start to see this coming into the public conversation more and more.
Can I chime in really quickly?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so with me, programming is my jam, and with working with youth specifically, like I said, I don't know how many people are on this call work predominantly with the young adult population, but what I would say is that all of the programming that I did when I was in the library had a media literacy focus. Granted, it was not marketed as media literacy. And I think that depending on your population, I don't know how sexy you can make media literacy sound to teens, but I will tell you, I had a program called the Turn It Up Teen Radio program that came out about 10 years ago, before podcasting was really taking it to this level, where I partnered with NPR station in Charlotte, and we taught these kids how to be journalists. And when we laid out the goals and the aims of the programs, it was media literacy skills that were embedded in it. The program itself was the Turn It Up Teen Radio program. It sounded cool, it sounded edgy, you know what I mean? But when you thought about the things that they were learning how to research content or topics to create their own stories, analyzing the research, learning how to pull credible resources, taking an angle of how to approach it, reconstructing their own media, creating a podcast, learning the editing process. And so they were doing media literacy. That was the aim of the program. But to them, they were just going to be journalists, you know what I mean? Teen journalists. So I don't know if that helps, but I think that it doesn't necessarily have to be marketed as media literacy, as long as you know with your program, what are the goals and aims that are going to be implemented and embedded in your program. Make the title sound catchy and sexy so that people will come and they will receive media literacy on the other end.
So Jamika, that's fabulous, because Nigel White, our one of our speakers yesterday, was making really a lot of the same points. Some of the media literacy stuff was kind of too dry. If I'm understanding what Nigel was saying, that's to kind of really get the teens started. But music, podcasting, making their own media, that that absolutely was a hook. And so it's starting with what our youth want and are interested in. It seems very key here. This is fantastic. So there have been a couple of other questions that have come in, and we'll try to get to those and maybe loop those into the conversation throughout the next hour or so, but I am going to need to move on to the next part of our agenda. I just want to say a big thanks to Donnell and Amy and Jamika for joining us. Denise Augusto is now with us. So thrilled to have you, Denise. Thank you so much for joining. I'll take a minute to introduce you to everyone. Denise is going to take us into an even more interactive piece of this conversation on media literacy generally. So for those who don't know Denise, she is a professor at Drexel University in Philadelphia, and she's the author of Information Literacy and Libraries in the Age of Fake News, which is quite aptly titled for the discussion that we're having here. And I'm really thrilled to have Denise with us. She's going to reflect a bit on what we've been hearing so far, and then take us through a little activity where we can start sharing out resources. So Denise, to get us going, and maybe to tell us a little bit more about yourself, given what you've heard here so far, what are you seeing as the role of librarians in really helping to develop these crucial media literacy skills?
Hi, everybody, and thank you. Thank you to Lisa and to everybody else, and to the panel, Amy, Donnell, and Jamika. The role of librarians. This is what I like to talk about more than anything as we move ever more toward creating community spaces within libraries. When we talk about libraries and media literacy, we like to suggest that there are two main attitudinal changes on behalf of library staff that can help enable library staff to become effective media literacy educators. The first is a focus on what the library does over what the library has. We want to think about libraries and other school environments as places where activities are taking place, not just collections and the stuff the library has, but the conversations, the interactions, and the educational experiences that are taking place in those spaces. And that's really the role that libraries can play, is to enable and support conversations about media writ large. And this was something that Amy said I think is very important. She said we should think about media broadly and holistically, not just digital media, but media as digital media, paper media, audio materials. All these materials are literacy, and librarians then can help move toward thinking about the role of these materials in people's lives. So the first way we want to think about in the library is a focus on what the library does over what the library has. And the second role is thinking about librarians as information educators. All of us, when we're in the field of library, every once in a while we get the question, why do we need libraries now that everything is online? And my answer is always, the role of the library is to help teach people about information. That's what we as librarians have as our special gift to society. We understand how information is created, how it's vetted, how it's shared, and how to evaluate information. And that's the role that we can play, which is also another way of thinking about media literacy. Librarians are information educators. So do you want to?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Denise. That's a really great setup on those 2 points. Yeah, why don't we maybe move into, so Denise is that okay with you, Denise? Do you want to share your screen, or I can share mine? We kind of cooked up a way for folks to share out some of what they've learned, what resources they're using. And I'm going to put a link in the chat so that others can get into this as well. Go ahead, Denise, I'll let you continue on leading us in, and I'll grab the link here to put in the chat.
All right, so let's see, I'm not sure if I can see the chat at the same time.
Oh yeah, don't worry.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So we're looking for ideas, things that have been helpful and useful to you as people who are working to educate people about media. What kind of resources would you like to share?
And what we've done here, so I just put the link to the Google Doc in the chat. For those of you who are agile enough to do both Zoom and then pull open a tab on your web browser and jump in, we'd love to have you in this space with us. It should be an open link where you can type things in, and we can kind of watch those in real time. Denise has also done the really great kind of legwork of getting us started. And maybe, Denise, if you want, feel free to scroll down a bit and note some of the resources you've already put in there. That might get folks going here.
Some categories you might think about in recommendations: professional associations, resource lists, available curricula, infographics, my personal favorite, articles, books, websites. We've already talked a little bit about professional associations. The Center for Media Literacy has lots of good resources. And of course, National Association. That would make Danelle smile.
Okay, we lost you for a second.
Say what?
Sorry, Denise, sometimes I didn't quite hear all of that. So just make sure to speak loudly.
Oh,
maybe me.
My volume. Is that better?
Gotcha. Yeah.
Is that better? I turned up the volume. Okay. Professional associations, Center for Media Literacy and National Association for Media Literacy Education are both doing important work. Some resource lists or curricula you might consider. Learn to Discern has adaptable curricula for helping people learn how to evaluate digital media and other types of media. The media literacy education in libraries for adult audiences, which we already talked about today. And Media Literacies Week recommended resources. A couple infographics here, particularly as we move in further and further into the pandemic, we're finding lots of issues related to misinformation. An important role for libraries and educators is helping people understand what information can be trusted about COVID. Here are two useful infographics. Looks like we've had some suggestions. Maybe
good.
I want to move on to those.
Yes, and if others want to put in the chat as well, I'm happy to call them out from that place as well. I'll just note that one of the resources that Denise listed here is a piece by Claudia Haynes, who's with us, and she joined. Oh, looks like we aren't able to edit. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. Today, and I may not have hit the right links. Okay, I want to call out Claudia Haynes's media literacy and storytime piece that she wrote several years back, but it relates very much for our children's librarians out there. I'm going to see what I can do while we're talking here to make this more accessible. I think they can get in, but they can't edit. So I'll see what I can do. But again, yes, thank you for those of you who are starting to put things in the chat. That's quite useful as well. And what we were thinking for this, and it's similar to what Claudia and I did when we did a smaller book study with the 3 Illinois libraries this summer, is we can kind of build this document and then make it available to all the participants afterwards. As a resource for you. It's a way for just stay current. Here, let's see if I can get the link. It may be that it's just for viewing. And I see anyone with the link can view. Here we go. All right, I just hit edit. So maybe a few of you can pop some things in there now. Sorry about that. Great, so thank you, Dorothy, for mentioning Tap, Click, Read. It's the book that Michael Levine and I worked on that came out 5 years ago. And then the ALSC's Look to Libraries resources are just fantastic. So that's wonderful. I don't know if Donnell and Jamika might still be with us, but if there are any favorites when they're working with teens to help teenagers. I just think about this from my own perspective as a mom of teenagers, just be a bit more discerning or kind of verify where they're getting their information when they see it on Instagram, for example. So resources like that can be very valuable. This is great. Now I'm seeing all the anonymous hedgehogs and the anonymous mouse in there, adding some things. Thank you all very much.
Something else I wanted to mention is my recent research involves parents and trying to understand how families guide media. And our work with parents has showed us that parents really are looking for guidance. And this is something libraries can provide. It's just conversation spaces. We constantly find this pattern of parents having the discrepancy between desire to enable their children to interact with media so that they can get ahead in the world and they can interact with other humans, and concerns about dangerous content, misleading content. Somebody asked in the chat, what's a really low bar program that libraries can provide? Discussion groups among parents is a very easy entry level low bar program, just teaching parents very basic ideas. What is media literacy, and letting them talk to each other. And we found that that goes a really long way for helping parents to feel more comfortable with their own decisions in guiding children's media.
That's a really good idea. Excellent. And I love seeing the good resources that are popping in there now. Thanks to everyone, the Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood, the resources that have come out from Tech Center that we're going to be talking about in just a moment. These will all bring, these are ways to bring up conversations with parents, not necessarily in a preachy way, right? It's a way to start bouncing just different ideas off of parents and educators. And I do think that point about trying not to be preachy is something that librarians are already really, really good at. And educators are too, as they've learned to be interacting with parents even more than ever in this crazy COVID-19 time. But just finding a way to talk with folks where you're not judging what they're doing, but trying to give them new resources for becoming their own kind of critical consumers of what they're looking at. So,
and that's another role librarians can play, is helping parents feel good about their decisions and really emphasizing that media guidance decisions are unique to each family and unique by context. We want to help people think about how they're interacting with media.
Yes.
Personal decisions.
Thank you. That's so right. Yes. So I'm going to have to close out this part of our discussion now, but many folks have asked whether this document will be available afterwards. So yes, as I mentioned, what we're going to be doing, we'll send out resources after the forum that'll be available to everyone who's RSVP'd, and they won't be perfectly formatted because it'll be our work here today, but it'll be a way to get started and allow you to have something to move forward from. There's also a resource document that was created, again, by Claudia and I in the book study program with the librarians in Illinois, that I'll also share out with anybody who's participated in this, so that you can have that as well. And that too just links out to many of the resources and reports and guidelines we've talked about here today. And it's nice to have it all in one place. So that'll be coming to you. Denise, thank you so much for joining us. This is the first time I've had a chance to, never met Denise in person yet, but this is getting pretty close. So I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. And we'll move now to our little another interactive moment, which we call it kind of our moments of reflection. My colleague Angela is going to put up on the screen, similar to the Mentimeter moment that we did yesterday, but in this time, in this case, we've designed this as a word cloud that will develop here together just over these next couple of minutes. So you'll see the instructions there on the screen. You go to menti.com, you just use that code, and just put in a couple of words that are on your mind, that reflect what you're learning today about this intersection between media literacy and media mentorship. And we'll just do this for a couple of minutes and take a quick little break, and then I'll be back. That's really fabulous. Thank you guys. I love seeing the word cloud moving with the music. Maybe that's it's like chilling me out a little bit. It's a good vibe. Thanks to everybody who has provided their thoughts in this, and that empowering collaboration and access are popping up as some of our key terms. It's really quite exciting as well. And that goes to these broader questions about equity that we've been trying to make sure are coursing through the conversation as well. Make sure that our students and our families feel like they have the power to use media and to gain access to information, and that they're not just being talked to. So, all right, so we're going to move into the next part of our discussion today. I'm really thrilled to have with us this amazing next panel. We're going to be delving into some new research and new work that I had a chance to be a participant in as well, but I'll make sure that have Angela, Alexis, and Jenna tell you a little bit more about it. Let me give them an official introduction, and then I will get out of the way. We are really fortunate to have with us today Alexis Lauricella, who is the director of the Tech Center at Erickson Institute, and also the mother of that beautiful little one who you saw on the screen a minute ago. Jenna Herzina is with her as program manager at Tech Center at Erickson, and it's really exciting that Jenna can be with us. Jenna was at the very beginning of much of this work and has been a great colleague to be getting some ideas from as well. And then a huge thanks to Angela Hubbard, who is the program officer for the Association for Library Service to Children, that are known as ALSC. And Angela and many of other library colleagues who have been on this forum so far have done so much to be promoting some of these ideas and thinking about what it means for professional learning for our educators of all kinds, including librarians. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Angela, to kind of get us started here, and I'll go off screen for a bit.
All right, thank you. Can everybody hear me? All right, Lisa, I want to thank you for having us and for just organizing this amazing event. I, for one, am enjoying participating as well as being the panelist. So thank you for that. Like Lisa said, I'm with the Association for Library Service to Children, which is ALSC. We have about 4,000 members who are in the library field, and we are thrilled to connect with Erickson Institute's Technology and Early Childhood Center. So that's where we came in as part of the IMLS grant-funded project that Alexis and Jenna will talk to you about. I'm just going to put, I noticed some people, thank you for adding some of our resources earlier, and I'm just going to add a couple more for you just to have on hand. The project that Alexis and Jenna are going to talk to you about, the Media Literacy and Early Childhood Report, like I said, was funded by the Institute for the Museum and Library Services. It started in 2018. It went on, had 2 forums in 2019 that included practitioners and leaders in the field. And the organizations that were a part of that were ALSC, the National Association for Media Literacy Education, namely, and the Association for Children's Museums, ACM. So Alexis and Jenna, can you guys describe why you developed this project?
Sorry, I had to find my unmute button. Yeah, so we basically hosted a June 2017 pre-conference for Namely focused on early childhood. And honestly, at this conference, we were just encouraged to apply for a grant. It was actually Chip and Tamara who, applied for the grant with ALSC and ACM and Namely. And I mean, in general, we just really saw that there was a need for consistency and more resources focused on media literacy in early childhood. So yeah, that's kind of how it came about.
And I'll just add, having come in after all the legwork was done, which is always a great place to come into a grant project. A huge thank you to Chip Donahue and Tamara, who really did a lot of the, and of course Jenna, who did a lot of the initial legwork getting this going. But just to kind of reiterate what Jenna was saying, there was this massive opportunity to focus on that early childhood aspect of media literacy, which is what Erickson is really known for, and that was the part that we really decided to bring into this.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, and shout out to Chip out there. I saw him comment. Hopefully Tamara's out there in the internet too. So in terms of the forums that you held, what did you learn from them? I know I had the pleasure of participating and being a part of some really amazing conversations. What did you learn from them?
What did we learn? So from the National Leadership Forum, we really focused on the media literacy background, the research that has been done, as well as all of the definitions that do exist for media literacy. And we really discussed, how those definitions, those existing definitions are either developmentally appropriate or not as related or appropriate for early childhood, specifically the kind of infants and toddlers. It's kind of hard to tell or expect infants and toddlers to act using media, right? They can't really share their political beliefs at that young age. And the National Practitioners Forum, this was in general the development of the skeleton of the report. So it was in between 35 and 40 practitioners from around the country. And we broke up into all of the different breakout groups or working groups. We talked about, the different ages and stages with media literacy from age, birth through 8 years old, as well as the different contexts, activities, tips for adults. The skeleton of this report was really developed by everybody who attended that practitioners forum.
And can you walk us through the report itself?
I think Alexis is doing that.
Okay.
Absolutely. So the forums were phenomenal, and I think we have to give them a lot more credit than they kind of feel like they get in the actual report. But all of the content really came out of those conversations and those meetings. And as Jenna was saying, that practitioners one was really a writing space where we came up with all these ideas and structure for how to really create this report. Lisa's dropped the link into the chat so you can see it there, but I can also open it up on our screen and just kind of walk through some of the basics of the report. It is 52 pages, I think, so I'm not going to go through all of it, but I think you should see my screen now. So this was just some images from the great group that was in the forums. Our report, you can find, there's a bit.ly link here that is shorter. But if you click on that link, you'll get to our website, and you can see some details about the report. There's a link here for the full PDF of the report, the framework, and then each of the subcomponents of our report, which are all really helpful in it. And we found this really helpful for practitioners to be able to pull out the pieces that they really need to focus on. And then if you want the not very brief report that we're giving today, there's a webinar clip here. You can go and look and have a 45-minute discussion about the report if you want to look at that. Let's see if I can shrink back down to my other screen. If not, I will just go this way. So the full report really starts with this framework. And I know it's small and may be hard to see, but what we did here is we really pulled out these main aspects of the traditional media literacy definition. And as Jenna mentioned, we really thought about how to make this relevant and practical for early childhood and what are the actions and the skills that they're developing, not that they've already mastered necessarily in these areas of media literacy. And you'll see a lot of the words that we talk about regularly: access, engage and explore, comprehend, critically inquire, evaluate, and create. What we did, in addition to that main framework and getting into these fundamental actions of media literacy, We broke it into these sections, and as early childhood people, we felt like it was really critical to spend a considerable amount of time talking about child development and sort of the basics of child development to inform whoever's using the framework to apply these concepts in a developmentally appropriate way. So an example from our child development section, this is a 5-page section, and it really just explains within the appropriate ages and stages how media is used by these groups, what the effects are, all of the research that we know about media use and young children across these different age groups. And we also include tips for adults, so how to take this research and make it applicable so the adults can really support these young children, because they are different. Young children are different than adults and teens when we're thinking about a lot of these concepts. The next section, again, we really wanted this to be very user-friendly and actually result in use and outcomes. And so we have this implementation plan section, which really digs into each of these aspects of these fundamental actions of media literacy: access, engage, explore, comprehend, critically inquire, evaluate, and create. And then it really provides ways to think about applying this with young children. So access, for example, we include the definition, we discuss the supporting skills that are necessary or relevant for that particular action. We have different tips for the adults for how to support this. And we even provide very kind of concrete, explicit activities to support each individual skill. And we go through this for all of the different ages and stages. And at the end of each action, we include a cultural considerations component as well, because we want to be very aware that each individual family or cultural group may be approaching these in different ways. The final part of the report includes a section on sustaining the work. And this is a section where we both are looking backwards and forwards, how to make sure we can really support practitioners in conducting media literacy experiences for young children. What are the barriers that may exist and make it harder to support media literacy in early childhood, and how to solve some of those barriers or those challenges? What are the existing solutions to some of that? And what are some needed solutions to further support practitioners and librarians in providing these media literacy opportunities for very early young children? So that's the 52-page report in, I think, 7 minutes or less. And I think one last thing I just want to highlight is we do even have these 1-page printouts that I think are really helpful and reflect the conversation we were just having about kind of low-hanging fruit to grab parents to support families in an easy access initial way. I think parents of young children, myself included, can feel overwhelmed with this idea of, oh gosh, now I need to do media literacy for my 3-year-old who you saw a minute ago. And so finding ways to make this into bite-sized, manageable steps, I think is something we really need to do for both practitioners and for families. So those sheets are there as well. I obviously want to give a huge thank you and shout out to everybody, Jenna, especially for taking the huge legwork of writing this entire thing and working on iterations with our practitioners and our experts, of course, the practitioners and experts who are part of our forums, and for all of the wonderful groups and associations that were critical in making this, the forums and the actual report happen. So I will leave that there, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and Jenna can answer more questions as well if those exist.
Thank you. That was a very way to zoom in on exactly what it is. I read the entire report and I encourage everyone to. I know that's usually not something people are thrilled to do, but it's very readable. Jenna did an amazing job of really capturing so many of the conversations and comments and thoughts that went into the 2 forums. And Alexis, you sort of already answered this question about, my first question was, how will the report be helpful for media mentors? And maybe you could just reiterate that last point about the way it's structured, because I think that is one of the most elegant pieces of your report.
Sure. I think that was our intention. So our intention was, how is this going to be used and applied, not how is it going to sit nicely on somebody's desk and not get read. And when we were writing and it was 52 pages, we were very concerned that a 52-page document would never be utilized. And so we really spent a lot of time figuring out how to break it down and make it something that any media mentor, kind of at whatever stage they are in that process, could find a place to jump in and start, or find a place to push themselves to go a little bit further. And I think any sort of space you jump in has that opportunity. So if you're a brand new media mentor, starting with that tips for practitioners might be a first place to start. And if you've been doing this for a little while, but maybe like most people focusing on that older age group, maybe jumping into that child development section and spending some time just thinking, okay, how could I maybe make this more relevant for a 4 to 5-year-old or a 3-year-old that's visiting our library or their families. So that was 100% our intention, and we're hoping people are using it in that way. So I think it's a great resource at any stage of the media mentor process.
And you definitely can't get better coming from you guys from Erickson Institute on the child development aspect. So I definitely encourage people to explore that, especially if you're not as familiar with the younger age range and are starting out this endeavor with media mentorship. What are some of the key points you want people to really remember?
So from my perspective, and Jenna may differ in this one, I think there is this difference between, as you mentioned, kind of expertise in child development, and even those who do have some understanding or even some good background in child development, recognizing how young children process and use media and cognitively understand media in a very different way than older children is something that I think is pretty important. And I think we highlight that well in that child development section of both saying, here's what kids can do in terms of child development, and here's how that impacts their media use and their comprehension of media and their application of media. Something that has been mentioned in terms of analogies and digital natives and all this conversation. These young kids look like they are professional media users. They will tap and click, they will manipulate, but we know when you actually pull back the curtain that what they're processing and understanding is much less than what it looks like they understand and what they look like they can do. So that's something that I really personally I really value in this report.
Thank you.
And I want to add to that is just, we really made the effort to include as much information related to anti-racism and equity and meeting your families where they're at when you serve families or children. And that's how I really perceive media literacy is, I think we all saw an uptick in interest in equity and justice and anti-racism, et cetera. And media literacy really plays a key role in that, right? I mean, children are surrounded by media, digital media, or whatever media, and they're either seeing themselves represented or they're not. And how are you holding those conversations as early as possible? So I think that's one thing that I want people to walk away with.
There's so much there. I mean, there's just so much that you can really dig into in all aspects of this. So in that vein, what's next for the work?
Alexa.
So sometime during the pandemic, I think August or September, we submitted a second round submission to IMLS to do even more practical work with this. So what we are proposing and hoping to do is a project with 4 different libraries across the country, almost every corner, and provide some professional development training to support their children's librarian departments to become comfortable media mentors and media literacy and early childhood experts. So we'll be doing professional development, hopefully doing professional development with them and supporting them in developing their own programs and activities to support media literacy with families and in early childhood. So that's our hopeful next step in this area. We would love to continue supporting the librarians directly and finding ways to connect and engage with them to kind of, like I mentioned, figure out these overlaps between really fully understanding child development, media use, and how to support those media literacy skills.
Mhm.
Wonderful, thank you. It's been really great to talk with you all. It's a little strange to be in the same city and not have seen you in almost a year, but it's great to have this opportunity. So thanks again, Lisa, for that. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Angela. And Alexis and Jenna, yeah, same. I mean, I'm not in Chicago, but I was going to be in Chicago a lot because we were going to do this amazing media mentorship project, and I haven't been able to be there in person. So glad to see you both. Thanks again for jumping in to join us for this. And one of the questions that came into the chat, I think you answered really well, Alexis, but maybe if I can just keep you on screen for one more second if you want to add anything more. Someone asked if someone from the Chinatown branch in Chicago asked if there might be at some point some collaboratives the way there were in early math, ways of helping people kind of see what this looks like in practice. It feels like maybe that is what the second step would be, this grant that you've applied for. Is that right?
Absolutely. That it's pretty similar, yes, to the early math lab, early math collaborative work. So absolutely, that's definitely potentially what we could do next. We're also in a tech center right now is in a space where we've been doing an awful lot of PD for educators around tech use in general. And so we're in a space where we're really thinking about how to expand that professional development or continuing ed work. And I think this media literacy space, we have both pieces now, the PD set up and the framework set up. And so whether or not we get this IMLS grant or not, I would think it would be a great place to partner with libraries who are interested in moving forward in either professional development or kind of collaboratively designing activities or programs to really support this. So I don't think it'd be as formalized as what we did with Early Math Collaborative at Erickson, but I would love to have those conversations.
Excellent. Well, fingers crossed for the grant. Maybe there's an IMLS program officer who's listening. I haven't looked at the whole participant list, but thank you all so much. And I'm excited to move to the last part of our discussion now. We have Devorah Heitner with us, and so glad you're here, Devorah. I'm going to do a quick introduction of you and then turn it over to you. One of the things that I did not mention yesterday when I was describing how the Illinois Media Mentorship Project was developed was that we wanted to make sure that we were not just helping librarians come together, which is of course very important, and do that peer-to-peer learning, but that we were also doing as much as we could to listen on the ground to what parents and educators really need and what they need from their library, but also whether they are seeing their children's librarians, their youth services librarians as a go-to or not, and what does that mean for this work? So we brought in Devorah as an amazing consultant on this project with us, and she's been doing focus groups that were a little different than what we'd imagined originally, because we originally, of course, we're not in a pandemic. We envisioned this project, but she's found some really great ways to connect with people and has been in the midst of some deep conversations with parents and educators that she'll tell us about in a moment. I also, if you don't already know about her work and her writing, I do just want to make sure that you have seen some of her writing and her pieces. She's the founder of a group called Raising Digital Natives and author of a book called Screenwise, Helping Kids Thrive and Survive in This Digital World. And when I first came across that book, I was so thrilled because it really does take a very realistic and kind of family-centered view of what media means in our lives today. It felt very real to me and not at all preachy. And I think that, again, as I've mentioned before, I really feel like that's a lot of what parents are looking for. So thrilled to have you with us, Devorah. I'm going to hand the microphone, so to speak, over to you. We'd love to hear your take so far on all of these issues. And then there may be some questions that come in that I'll throw your way as well.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. And it's great to hear what the folks at the Tech Center have been working on too, and to just see all the ways that this work on media mentorship and media mentorship at different ages and stages is coming together in ways that, you know, libraries can use to support families and kids. It's very exciting. So I think there are some challenges in doing focus groups on Zoom. I think one of the good things is that we may have been able to be accessible to some folks who might not have come into an in-person environment to talk about things because of childcare issues or other reasons. So, you know, that's been one of the upsides. I was just finished the Chicago focus groups, and I know there's going to be one more this week in Spanish. And then I've done focus groups as well in Schaumburg and Skokie. And there's a lot of commonalities and themes that came up in all 3 sites. And I did two groups in each site, as well as some individual interviews to kind of supplement in a couple of cases. So one of the things we're seeing is families are definitely using libraries, and they're continuing to use libraries even during this pandemic. A few people didn't know that their library was open or had services during the pandemic, or maybe learned kind of, you know, months in, like, oh, I didn't realize I could get curbside, or, oh, I didn't know my library was open. So that was interesting to talk to families about sort of what level of knowledge they had, or how much awareness they had about what library services were and weren't available right now. In general, I talked to a lot of people who had very positive relationships and associations with libraries. I also, in addition to parents, these groups have all included some teachers, and teachers are certainly also, you know, heavy users of the library. But the idea of what the library can be is really interesting, and what people see librarians as expert in, and what they see that going into the library building or accessing the library online, what they envision is kind of possible. So when we were translating the questions into Spanish, this was something I pointed out to the person who's going to lead the focus groups in Spanish, is when you say even technology to parents, what that means to parents and how that's going to translate is very, very different for different people. So, and we know that because there's been such a negative stigma around digital experiences for kids, that a lot of parents feel a little bit defensive about their kids' access to technology, and are actually starting from a place of potentially measuring their parenting against what they call screen time, right? Which is something, you know, I wrote Screenwise, like kind of against the idea of this amalgamation of screen time, right? And to say that we should be looking at the ways kids use tech in a more nuanced way. But since parents have been told the yardstick of being a good parent is less time on tech, they're going to come into any conversation about kids and technology already sort of prepared to tell you, oh, my kid doesn't get that much time on tech. And I mean, during this time when kids are in school remotely, their only social access to other kids, certainly throughout Chicagoland, where I've been doing these interviews, is pretty much via tech for most kids. It's astounding to me that this is still what parents are saying when they initially start the conversation. It's like, oh, I limit screen time, or my kids don't have that much access to tech. And so even just using the term technology is very, very loaded, which is interesting. So when you start to talk about, does your kid play video games? Does your kid watch DVDs? Does your kid use a search engine like Google or YouTube? Do you ever use apps, like educational apps with your kids, which I know from Lisa's work, you know, the sort of wild west of the app store, but at the same time, saying, does your kid use apps, or naming some apps and asking if kids have had experience with those apps, is such a different conversation with parents than saying, tell me about your kids and technology. It's just worth thinking about as a research design issue, because parents will say, oh, my kid loves that show, or, oh, we didn't like this app, but we use that app. But if you say, do they use technology? They're like, oh, my kid doesn't get screen time. It's so fascinating. So just something that I observed and was not totally surprised to observe, but the way we were able to get past that was by using those kinds of specifics and getting people to talk about the actual experiences their kids engage with. And then we talked with families a lot about, you know, where they are going for expertise about their kids' relationships with digital experiences? Where are they going for information about, maybe time on tech, maybe access to apps? What apps are good for kids of a certain age? What shows might kids be interested in? How can they access things that might support their children's either academic or beyond academic interests? What, kids' passion projects, the things their kids want to learn about. And they all see libraries pretty much as a place to get books. And very few of them have even accessed some of the other things that libraries have as physical offerings. A couple of people I talked to checked out DVDs. A couple of folks I talked to were aware that their library maybe has either apps that they can use in the library or ways that they can borrow computers or other technological devices. But most families not only see the library as a place to get books, but are pretty focused on that and often kind of time driven when they're coming in. And that, I think, is going to affect a lot of the ways we want to think about potentially offering libraries as media mentorship spaces. Kids come into the library with a time limit with their parents. And also a lot of parents talked about their ability to talk with a librarian is compromised by the fact that they're parents and by the fact that they're coming in, especially with young children. So one participant, for example, said, when I'm there, I'm spread too thin to talk to an adult. Right. And this was a mother of 3 kids under the age of 6. When she goes into the library with her kids, she's just trying not to lose track of her kids. And this is, sort of pre-pandemic, libraries are open. She's coming in with her kids. And now, and actually in some cases, libraries were open in the communities where I was talking even during the pandemic. So people were talking about this as maybe a time where they really have to spend energy and effort on kind of controlling the chaos, and they can't engage with an adult. We did talk about options, and when we ended the conversations always on like, are there things you wish the library would do or what would be helpful to you? And some of them did talk about things like a library affinity group, an advisory group, or even just parent support groups that meet in the library. They are also really interested in the process of discovery, and a lot of people really complimented the ways their library was laid out, that they feel encourages discovery. And again, this is all about books and traditional media for libraries. And there was no parallel in terms of discovery for, apps or DVDs or other kinds of experiences. They really talked about just letting kids, that the library is a place where kids can explore, and that they would talk to a librarian if they were looking for a specific book or they needed a recommendation for a book for that age. For the people who talked about media mentorship, almost all of them had a contact outside of their public library who was a librarian. So teachers would talk to their school librarian. One person talked about having a personal friend who's a librarian in another community who is very up on, as she put it, up on these things and very aware of apps for kids, DVDs, movies, and other experiences that might be interesting for kids. And that was a family where the child is primarily the on the avant-garde of discovery. So this is a child who's 7, who's taught themselves GarageBand, for example, and is doing all kinds of how-to things using YouTube. Most people, when they look for digital advice, are going to other parents, and a lot of parents were pretty savvy about using social media for that purpose. So they're going to their Facebook or sometimes Instagram, but often Facebook, and specifically groups, especially during remote schooling. There are all kinds of groups of parents where parents are actually referring each other to educational apps. In one case, and this is in Schaumburg, the library already had a tutoring program in place that a lot of people that I spoke to had found really helpful during remote school. So they're using a pre-existing program of the library that they're already aware of. And they were so excited that their kids could get, one-to-one help during remote school, because that's been one of the challenges in general. And this is, beyond my work with New America. I've been doing a lot of work with districts around the country to try to help make remote school more tenable, less clunky, less challenging to access. And the scale is one of the big problems, that a lot of kids really need individual help for even small periods of time. And remote learning, most of the setups and most of the structures of remote learning are not doing a great job with that. There's a lot of one-to-many, a lot of waiting around, a lot of kids who are not able to ask questions or feel shy to ask questions, or even Google Meet in particular doesn't have a really great way to chat, and a lot of schools are using that just as one example of a structural problem, not to sort of call out Google in particular. Every learning management system has its ups and downs, but I was just in a long conversation with a bunch of parents about Google Meet, and the fact that you can't privately chat to the teacher and ask your question without asking in front of everyone else is a big problem for some students. So having access through the library to one-to-one tutoring, of course, is tremendous, but a lot of those parents felt like they had discovered something that was a little bit of a secret. So that was really interesting. And even, again, the parents, for example, in Chicago, who CPL buildings, many of them were open during the pandemic. One person said, well, my library was actually open for months, but I had no idea because everything else was closed. I just assumed the library was closed. So that was really interesting to think about, you know, when schools shut down, a lot of people would assume that libraries would follow schools. And so she was really excited to find out when libraries were open. A lot of the questions about what would be helpful in terms of media mentorship were really hard for people to conceive of because they're so connected to using Facebook and asking other parents, that the idea of talking to a librarian or going to a program at the library that might introduce them to ways for their kids to explore new experiences in the media landscape was a little like hard for them to even wrap their minds around. But a couple of them got excited about something like a cooking show or some of the interactive programs that libraries are doing, especially during this time. Let's see. So yeah, media literacy was another thing that a few parents brought up a little separately from other aspects of kind of using media to support your kids' passion projects and other things. So talking about, you know, trusted news sources. And I asked actually if they were getting that at school, and parents said they didn't know. And this is something that I'm seeing with a lot of both media literacy and digital citizenship programs that do happen that are school-based, is schools don't always really call parents' attention to the fact that they might be teaching that in a unit on research or in social studies or kind of embedded into a subject matter project. So that's just something for both libraries and I think schools and school libraries to think about is, do they want to make sure that parents really know? Because sometimes there is some really great stuff happening, especially in the area of media literacy at school, for example, but parents have no idea that it's happening. Let's see. Yeah, the programs that people were excited about were parent support groups, anything where maybe the kids were engaged in a program. Again, imagining a time when we can gather again, maybe if kids are engaged in a program, and that would be a time that parents might be able to talk with a librarian more extensively. People always really like the grab and go stuff. Skokie has these grab and go kind of STEM bags, and a lot of people mention that they really appreciate those. In Chicago, people really appreciate the museum passes that you can get at libraries. And so thinking about how to extend grab and go into other resources that parents can take with them and look at when they have a minute, maybe when their kids are napping or when their kids are engaged at home. But also we really have to think about how we can combat this stigma, because I had parents who were on the Zoom with me who were upset to sort of admit that and they framed it that way, like, I'm admitting that my kid is on a screen so that I can be talking with you. And I was like, well, of course they are. Like, what do you mean? So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to engage with you on kind of what I'm hearing from families. And I just will also say that in general, people see their libraries as a refuge, both during this time and in general. They have very positive associations with the library. And the CPS teachers especially really appreciate, apparently there's a portal in CPS in the computers that they can get right from their CPS account to the library. And the teachers that I talked to in Chicago were like, that is the most amazing thing in the world. I'm, accessing that all the time. It's really helpful. Okay.
Wow, Deborah, really interesting and good food for thought on many fronts. And we'll bring some of this forward into tomorrow as well, because you provided some really concrete examples, I think, of what, if we want to innovate in programming or do parent support groups or a whole host of other things, we may be able to help kind of chip away at some of the perceptions, as noted in the chat, this question of like how parents and even some educators kind of see the library is still so heavily weighted toward the it's a place with books, shelves of books, people who get, which is of course also amazing, and we need to keep tapping into that. But recognizing the skill sets of the librarians who are there, I think is not top of mind. And I think your research is helping us to see what we're going to need to do to overcome that. So huge thanks to you. So for those who are really kind of interested in following closely on this particular Illinois project, we're going to be continuing to dive into these results with the library directors in Illinois, but also I'll be writing kind of a final piece that'll come out probably in February or March that describes what we learned from this Illinois project, and you'll be getting a deeper dive onto those, into some of those insights at that time as well. We are nearing the end of this 90-minute segment of end of day 2. And I just want to say just a huge thanks to all of you for being with us for this time, for all the really engaged conversation in the chat, and to our speakers for bringing forward so much good information for us. We have a couple of just quick notes before we end. I want to say thanks to those who yesterday, if you were with us yesterday, you know that we are doing some surveys. This is all part of this broader project as well, just to help understand how this peer-to-peer learning works and what's working and what's not. And a big thanks, I should have mentioned her earlier, to Elaine Zarnecki, who is our evaluation consultant on this and who's been helping with the survey work. So I'm going to put the survey in the chat, or maybe one of my colleagues will be able to put the survey in the chat so that you guys can take it. There's just a couple of questions in there about today's program. And I also would love to kind of prime the pump for tomorrow a little bit. I'm going to tell you just a bit of what we're going to experience tomorrow. And essentially what this means is you do have a little bit of homework. It's just a bit of kind of mulling and ruminating that I'd like you to do, thinking about what you heard today, because what we're going to be doing tomorrow is bringing you into a workshop space where you can take all of these different ideas that might be swirling around and really start thinking concretely about what does this mean. For those who are educators who are with us, this might mean, what do I want to change in my classroom or with my own engagement with my school librarian or with my public librarian down the street. It may be, what is the next step I'm going to take to change or tweak some of my programming? Does this mean I'm going to bring my colleagues together? Am I going to have a new meeting? Are we going to maybe build a new resource list? But we're going to get you into a space where you can get pretty concrete and start thinking about how to apply a bit of what you've learned here. And so be ready. That's basically what I'm saying. Kind of bring some of those ideas together. We'll have you in some smaller groups so you'll be able to talk together. We'll be moving out of this webinar format and into a meeting format. So we'll be able to have breakout sessions, and we'll be organizing those breakout sessions according to some of your interest areas. Claudia Haynes will be back with us on screen to be presenting with Shamira Williams in a really neat talk about some of the intersections between this work and computational thinking. And then we'll have Elena Lopez and Amber Krieger on to talk about innovations in family engagement in the library space. So those are going to be a lot more food for thought. I think we've got almost everything here. Let me make sure that that survey link gets in the chat before I let you all go. Just going to scroll through here to grab it, and keep me posted. I'm, very open to questions, feedback, ideas for things we need to make sure we talk about tomorrow. I'm just so thrilled to have all of you with us and to be able to be continuing this conversation with you. So with that, the link is in the chat. Take a minute to fill out that survey, and I'm going to say good night and goodbye, and see everybody tomorrow. Thanks to you all. Take care.